to the Week 11 preview episode brought to you by Brian's Deductions. We have a good amount of stuff that we're going to talk about today, so before we jump into the content, I just want to ask that you like, subscribe, share with everybody you know, and comment anything that you would like to hear from me going forward, whether it's sports related, non-sports related, etc. We have a good amount have about probably half the league that we'll probably talk about in this preview. So we'll just jump right into it right now. So we'll start with an AFC matchup that has gotten a lot more interesting with the new developments that we've heard over the last few hours. So for the game that I'm referring to is the Steelers and the Browns. So on Cleveland's side, we found out today that Deshaun Watson was playing through his shoulder fracture in the second half of the game against the Baltimore Ravens this week, and he has to undergo season-ending surgery for that. So he had a phenomenal second half, and this was a game that obviously, if you were a Browns fan, you were hoping he would be able to use this as the turning point to start playing more consistently and elevating his level of play to support the defense that has been championship caliber. That I termed championship caliber, I believe, during the Week 9 recap. Also, we learned that DorianThompson-Robinson is expected to be the starter for this game, so it will not be P.J. Walker, which is what we were thinking might be the case when we first heard the news. So it'll be interesting to see how the Browns look to call things for DTR as opposed to PJ. I think this is a situation where Kevin Stefanski probably wants to see what he has with the young guy, and also I think they feel like there's more of an upside play to play him instead of PJ. I think that they feel like there may be more of a ceiling with DTR than with PJ. So I think this is the game, obviously, where both teams are going to try to mirror each other in terms of relying on the run and relying on their defense for the most part. Obviously, Kenny Pickett can make plays for the Steelers, but this is one of those. At least this year has been one of those seasons where it's just you want to keep it close, and then in the fourth quarter let Kenny do what he does if you're the Steelers. So obviously, a big piece of this game, especially with this being DTR's second start, is going to be It's going to be the turnover battle. As of right now, the Steelers are tied for first with a plus 10 turnover differential, while the Browns are -4, and that's tied for 24th in the league. And in games where Deshaun Watson didn't play the majority of the snaps, they've been -2. If you don't count DTR's debut against the Ravens, it was even. And speaking of that game, I feel like you have to give DTR a little bit of a pass for that game because it was basically a spot start. He didn't find out until the morning of because most people expected Deshaun to play that game, and it was a situation where he was a late scratch. And playing against the Ravens defense is a tough battle already, but doing it off with basically only a few hours notice is pretty difficult, even for the most experienced of quarterbacks. So Dorian had a tough game in his debut, but I believe that he'll have a better game because they'll have more preparation and have an idea of how they want to use him for this game. On the Steelers side, again, like we said, it's just gonna be a situation where you want to try to make sure that you run the ball effectively and that you just keep it competitive as long as you can if you're unable to pull away from Cleveland on the scoreboard because you are playing against, again, like I said, a championship caliber defense in the Cleveland Browns. Now, in the 6 wins that the Steelers have had, they've averaged 117 117.3 rushing yards per game, and in the 3 losses, they've averaged 75 yards per game. Now, again, it will probably be a tough sledding against Cleveland, but we did see in week 2 the Steelers being able to rely on their defense to make some plays, including a strip sack by TJ. It was either TJ Watt or Alex Highsmith. I can't remember, but it was a strip sack on Deshaun Watson that led to a touchdown that ended up becoming a game-winning TD. I think that this game plays out similarly, except I think this is a situation where the ball is in Kenny Pickett's hands, and he goes down the field and wins the game for the Steelers like he has done a few times this season. So for this game, my final score prediction is Steelers 23, Browns 20. And after that, we will move to the next the other AFC North matchup. And I believe in another week two rematch as well, in the Bengals and the Ravens. Also, again, this is another game where I think that whoever holds on to whoever controls the turnover battle should be able to win this, because the Bengals turnover differential is +10, tied for first, obviously, with Pittsburgh, and the Ravens are +1 with their turnover differential, where they're tied for 11. I think this is the game where the Ravens may rely on their run game as usual. I'm sure Lamar will make spot plays here and there, but I think it's a situation where they want to get back to establishing the ground game, especially since that was something that was working for them early to help them build that 24-9 lead. And in games that they played, in the 7 games that they won this year, they've averaged 161.7 yards per game on the ground. And in the 3 losses, they've averaged 139 yards per game on the ground. So it's not a huge difference in yardage, but it is impactful, as you can see, because those 20 yards can make a huge difference come the fourth quarter when you're trying to put the game away. Now, on the Bengals side, in week 2, obviously Joe Burrow was still dealing with the calf injury, so we didn't see the Joe Burrow that we've seen the last few weeks, and I think since the bye week, that's probably the point where we've seen Joe Burrow finally get closer and closer to 100%. And since that bye week, Joe Burrow has had 74% completion percentage, averaged 326 yards per game, had 7 touchdowns and it had a 7 touchdown to 2 interception TD interception ratio. And he's been able to find his top target, Jamar Chase, who has averaged 8.7 targets per game, 6.3 receptions per game, 88.3 yards per game, and has had 2 touchdowns. So I think that the Bengals will obviously look formidable offensively as they usually do. I think this will be a close game throughout, obviously, but I think the combination of the Ravens being at home and I just think them finding a way to play flawless offensively. I'm not sure if either team turns the ball over in this game. Honestly, I think this may be a flawless offensive performance from both sides, but I just think that Baltimore will just find a way to avenge Sunday's loss, and they'll just ride the wave of a home field advantage in this game to complete the sweep over the Ravens this season. Complete the sweep over the Bengals this season and continue to hold their place atop the AFC North. So my final score prediction for that game is Ravens 27, Bengals 24. Now to another game that has become a lot more interesting based on what's happened the last few weeks, the Jets and the Bills. So obviously the Bills come into this after having fired their offensive coordinator Ken Dorsey. So I think this is a game where they will try to establish the run early and often. Will they stick with it? I don't know, but I think that might be one of those situations. I also wouldn't be surprised if we saw some more concepts with Josh Allen under center just for this game, just because you want to try to find some quick fixes if you're the Bills offense. I think this game will be more on the lower scoring side, just because you have two of the top 7 defenses in terms of points per game allowed. So on the Jets side, the X factor is obviously Zach Wilson, because in the games that they've won this year, he's turned the ball over 4 times, but for the most part he kept the ball out of harm's way. But in the 5 games they lost, he's had 7 total turnovers and had some back-breaking turnovers, including the one against the Raiders on Sunday. So it's gonna so you're not playing the most, even though the Bills have done a good job keeping people from scoring. I wouldn't say you're playing the most formidable Bills defense you can, obviously with your Davis White and Matt Milano being out. But but obviously the Bills are still a good defense, very stout, and it's a situation where you're. It's just a situation where I think if you're Zach Wilson, you just have to make sure, obviously, you keep the ball out of harm's way, but you also have to make sure that you're not limiting yourself or being almost unwilling to try to make certain plays just because you want to be careful with the ball, obviously. On the Bills side, obviously, as we said before, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Josh under center a little bit more for this game, and obviously them trying to establish the run. But I think obviously one of the biggest solutions to trying to unlock your offense is making sure your best player gets the ball as much as possible. So obviously the best player on that offense is Stephon Diggs, and the numbers show that when they win, Stephon's getting a good amount of looks, as he's averaging 10.8 targets a game, 8 receptions a game, 93.2 yards a game, and has 3 touchdowns. Surprisingly, all those touchdowns came against Miami in Week 4. And then in the losses, obviously, he's still gotten his fair share of targets with 9.6 per game, but he's only averaging 6.6 receptions per game, 80.2 yards per game. He also has 4 touchdowns, which was a surprising number considering that he only has 3 in the wins. But obviously being able to get your best player the ball is a big way to unlock your offense. And even though Sauce Gardner will likely be shadowing Stephon the whole game, I believe this is a game where they try to get him going early and often, especially after last week where he only had 3 catches for 34 yards. So I think this is one where they try to make sure they just try to make sure they get the ball in his hands as early and often as possible. As I said before, I think this one would be more on the low scoring side, but I think the Bills pulled this one out at home, and my final score for that one is Bills 21, Jets 17. Now we will take a trip to the south for the next game, which is the Titans and the Jaguars. So after the first week where Will Levis set the world on fire, the Titans have come back to earth offensively and as a group. I think that's to be expected. They did play two tough defenses in both the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I wouldn't. So there's no cause for panic here, and obviously, again, you're dealing with a rookie quarterback who's learning. So you're gonna have your ups and your downs, and obviously, you weren't gonna have situations where DeAndre Hopkins was gonna just be running behind defenses every single week and catching 3 touchdowns. So obviously, things were gonna regress to the mean. So I think the Titans will be fine in the long run as a team. I think will continue to improve and continue to show flashes as the season continues. They are playing a tough Jacksonville defense, but the Jacksonville defense can be had through the air as they are currently 30th in passing yards allowed per game. Now they are also tied for first in takeaways per game, so there is a possibility that Will Levis may give them they may coax Will Levis into turning the ball over at least once in this game. Offensively, for the Jaguars, they've been mostly middle of the pack, and in the red zone, they've been. I don't want. Abysmal feels too strong of a word, so I'll say they've been subpar for now. They've been subpar. I feel like for them, kind of like with Buffalo, I think this is just a situation where you just have to make sure you get your best player going. He was, to be their best player offensively. The person to unlock their offense is Travis Etienne. I understand that Trevor Lawrence has had a tough season this year, but I feel like Travis is the true engine of that offense. And in the 6 wins they've had this year, he's had 23 and a half touches per game, 111 and a half total yards a game, and 8 total touchdowns. While in the 3 losses they've had, he's had 16 touches per game, 220. He's had 74.7 yards per game, and he has not scored a touchdown. So I think this is a game where Jacksonville, kind of like Pittsburgh, the Ravens, and other teams that we talked about earlier. I think this is one where you rely on your running backs and your running game, and you rely on your defense as well. I believe that they'll probably get maybe a turnover or two off of Will Levis this week, as I kind of said earlier. So I think this may be a little bit more on the lower scoring side. So for this one, I have the Jaguars winning 23-14. And then for our final divisional matchup of this preview, I have the Seahawks and the Rams. I don't have too much analysis on this. I think, honestly, on the Rams side, the question is if Matt Stafford plays this week. If he does, I think they have a chance to at least keep it close and keep it competitive for the most part. I do understand that Aaron Donald was wreaking havoc. Him and Bryant Young were wreaking havoc in week 1, but I don't think this is a situation where I just don't see Seattle having another game where they're stuffed on the ground and where Geno plays below average. I would say. So I think, and if you're Seattle, I think obviously this is a prime trap game. If you could ever say that there was one involving a divisional rival, with the 49ers coming up the week after. But I think the loss from week 1 will motivate them enough to make sure that they're focused on this game and not looking past the Rams at all. So for this one, I'm assuming Matthew Stafford will be able to play. So with that, I'm predicting that the Seahawks will find a way to win and keep pace with the 49ers for first place going into week 12 as they beat the Rams 24-20. All right, now we move back down to the South. for Cardinals Texans. So in a previous episode, I believe it was week 8, we talked about how the Cardinals with Josh Dobbs at the time were unable to really finish games, especially on the offensive side. And we see that with the numbers because they are currently 31st in the league with 2.7 fourth quarter points per game after averaging 6.4 last season, with Kyler Murray playing the majority of the games. So I think with Kyler back, obviously that number will rise, as will their rushing attack, which is already ninth in the league with 126 and a half rushing yards per game. So I think this is a game where they will obviously try to feature James Conner early and often, but and obviously Kyler being the master of the read option that he is, will also have his chances, especially within the red zone, where Arizona is surprisingly ahead of Houston in terms of scoring percentage. They are 15th, while Houston's tied for 19th. So I think that's going to be the Cardinals' game plan. And obviously, with Kyler, I think as I said in the Week 10 recap, you trust him a little bit more with the offense and, in terms of expanding the playbook. So I don't think you'll see a conservative Cardinals team come to fourth quarter, and I think that's part of the reason why they weren't winning those games earlier in the season, while they were able to find a way to win against the Atlanta Falcons this weekend. So definitely should see an increase in fourth quarter points going forward, especially in this game. I think that obviously this game will be a shootout both ways. I think that C.J. Stroud and the Texans will continue to improve on their fourth quarter points per games, which is already 8.2, which is tied for third. And I think obviously their passing game as well, which is 274.3 per game, which is second in the league. And I think against a team like Arizona, even though their passing yardage is passing yardage allowed per game is within the top half of the league, I think that's a little misleading just because most teams this year have obviously either built to lead or stay competitive. So teams are a bit more geared to run against them than to throw the football. But I think this is a game where both quarterbacks play extremely well. And I think this may be a last team to hold the ball wins type of game. And as a result, for me, I think the Texans find a way to win this game and continue to maintain pace, and for both the NFC South divisional race and also the AFC wild card in general. And my final score for that game is Texans 34, Cardinals 31. And then moving a little bit more east, another game which may make underrated game of the week, the underrated game of the week theme, depending on how people read it. The Raiders and the Dolphins. I think probably 2 or 3 weeks ago we would have just chalked this up to being a get right game for the Dolphins, especially with the way things were looking under Josh McDaniels. But now, obviously, the Dolphins have a chance to do something that they haven't been able to do all season, which is get a win against a team that's 500 or better, while obviously the Raiders are looking to move their win streak to 3 straight. Obviously, the biggest thing about the Dolphins this year, as we kind of just said, obviously they've been able to beat the bad teams, but they've been unable to beat the teams that are 500 or better. And offensively, against those teams that are below 500, they're averaging 39 points, almost 500 yards a game, and surprisingly have a -3 turnover differential. But they have been able to mitigate that because Obviously, they've been scoring at a high rate, and they were playing teams that were overmatched talent-wise. And against the teams that are 500 or better, they are averaging 17 points per game, 300 and basically 310 total yards per game, and have an even turnover differential. But they've been unable to. But they've been unable to crank up their offense in the same way. Now, this is a game where I could see Mike McDaniel trying to establish the run early, especially now that you're getting Devin Achane back, along with Raheem Mostert. Um, so I think they will probably try to go ahead and do that, especially against a Raiders defense who is currently 29th in rushing yards allowed per game. So they could be had there. I don't know. Obviously, Tua will have to make plays in this game, but I think this is one of those where I think the Miami would be more comfortable just relying on the run and asking Tua to make plays here and there. Now, obviously, they're going to take their shots down the field. When you have Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, you're going to take those shots, especially against a banged up secondary like Vegas. But this would probably be a situation where I think they use what they did in the second half against the Chiefs, where they were able to run the ball a lot more effectively, and use that to set up their passing game, so to speak. For the Raiders, obviously they've been a lot more productive these last 3 games on the ground. So I'm sure that they will try to make sure that Josh Jacobs gets the ball early and often. This is also a game where they're probably going to have to throw the ball just because you got to keep up with Miami. So unless they dominate time of possession, I think this is one of those where they're going to have to throw the ball more. So I would look for Devontae Adams to get a lot more looks than would have a lot more production than he's had over the last couple games. It haven't been terrible numbers, but it's a situation where at least against the Giants, he didn't really need to do too much because obviously the Giants haven't been too potent offensively, and they were also able to run the football and the Raiders were also able to run the football very effectively. And then against the Jets, defense did a good job. Again, you relying on the run game, and it's one of those things where you're able to keep your rookie quarterback from having to do too much. But this is probably the game where Aiden O'Connell is going to have to throw the ball a little bit. Again, you'll try to keep the ball on the ground as long as you can, but this is one of those again where you might have to engage in a shootout. So for this one, I believe the Raiders keep it competitive for probably 3 quarters, 3.5, and then just late in the game, the Dolphins offense just makes a few more plays just to separate themselves, and I believe Miami goes on to win this one 35-24. So now for another team from the NFC West, we have the Bucs and the 49ers. So for this game, I think obviously the X factors for both teams are obviously the quarterbacks. On the 49ers side, we talked about a few weeks ago, obviously, the impact of losing both Trent Williams and Deebo Samuel. I think we saw for sure what they both bring to the table in the game against Jacksonville this week. And obviously it helps a guy like Brock Purdy, who in the 6 wins they've had this season is completing 72% of his passes, averaging 261.2 yards a game, and has 14 total touchdowns. And in the 3 losses, is completing 62.5% of his passes for 254 yards a game, 3 touchdowns, and also 5 interceptions. So you can see what the loss of both players is how that's affected them. I think that this is another game where both quarterbacks. I feel like both quarterbacks will play well. Obviously, I don't know if this is going to be. You may see a game. You may see a turnover or two from the Bucs side, because I think Baker has been had against certain teams that have good front fours or front sevens in general. Because we did see how the Eagles defense played. Now, part of that was the fact that the Eagles were able to run the ball very effectively and control the time of possession. But for the most part, I would say I think Baker plays pretty well. I think that the 49ers will probably try to run the football effectively, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Tampa is a top 5 defense against the run. So this may be one where you just want to air it out against a team that is 31st against the pass. And with guys like, obviously, IU, Debo, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, and things of that nature, I think that obviously they'll try to run the football effectively, but I think this is one of those where you just kind of at some point if the run game isn't working, they'll just go ahead and just throw the ball over the park, and they might do that anyway. But I think this will be a nice competitive game. That'll go down. That'll definitely go down to the wire. But I think that San Fran's success against the Bucs defense through the air will carry them through the day. And while I believe that Baker will have a nice game himself offensively, Rashad White, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin as well, I think that the 49ers find a way to win this one, and they win this 31-23. And for our final game of the preview, we have the Super Bowl rematch between the Eagles and the Chiefs. This is a game that could see a few turnovers, as both teams are currently on the negative side of the turnover differential. The Eagles are -2, which is tied for 16th in the league, while the Chiefs are -4, which is -4, which is tied for 24th. So for this game, I think that coming off the bye, Philadelphia is definitely going to try to establish the run, kind of like we just said with the Tampa game a few minutes ago. And as we've seen this season in the games that they've won, they average 136 yards per game and 11 touchdowns. While in the one loss they had 80 yards and a touchdown. So I think this is a game where against a Chiefs defense that is top 5 against the pass and top 4 in total, and 4th in total yards allowed per game, but middle of the pack against the run, I think this is one where the Eagles come in and say, okay, we're going to try to play smash mouth football, control time of possession, try to get the crowd out of the game early, and make things happen. Now, of course, they're still going to try to make their throws to the air. I mean, when you have a guy like A.J. Brown, who is competing with Tyreek Hill for Offensive Player of the Year and potentially MVP, you're obviously going to try to make sure take your shots when you can. But I think, again, kind of like Miami with the Raiders, I think this is going to be one where they want to establish the run early and use the run to set up their deep shots down the field. Now, on the Philly side, obviously, they are first against the run, but they're 28th against the pass. So this is a situation where Kansas City will obviously try to do the same thing and try to, incorporate the run game. But this is a Chiefs team where they've had to basically be a passing offense for the most part. I wouldn't call them one-dimensional, but the least amount of pass attempts that Patrick Mahomes has thrown this season happened to be last week against Miami, and that was 30. So if your quarterback is throwing 30-plus times a game, even though, of course, that makes sense in today's game, that also shows you, especially in games where, the Chiefs are always competitive in games, so it's not like they're down by 14 and they're just throwing the ball. But that just shows you how how effective they feel that their run game has been, that they've got to throw that much and that often. Now for Pat himself, obviously he's in the 7 games they've won, he's thrown 71.6. He's completed 71.6% of his passes. He has 282.3 yards per game, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and a fumble loss. And in the 2 losses, he has he's completed 58.4% of his passes, 233 yards, averaged 233 yards a game, has 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a fumble loss. So, obviously, in both situations, Pat has been a little bit more turnover prone than he usually is. But when you have this level of a defense, that you're able to kind of get away with it for a game or two. For this game, this obviously has the potential to be the highest scoring game of the week. It also will be very competitive and very entertaining throughout. I think that this is a situation where the Eagles obviously will obviously be motivated. 1, coming off the bye, and then 2, obviously because of how the Super Bowl game ended. But I think this is just a situation where the Chiefs are at home. Very hard to beat the Chiefs in Arrowhead, and I think they just ride their home field advantage to another win. I think that this will definitely be I think it'll be a 2-score game late. I think that the Eagles then go down and score a touchdown, and obviously instead of kicking the extra point, they go for 2 to try to make it a situation where they just need a field goal to win. But the Chiefs obviously get the ball back, and then I think Patrick Mahomes just makes 1 or 2 plays where it's a scramble or just a throw to somebody not named Travis Kelce to seal the deal, and I believe that the Chiefs win 30-28. So that was the Week 11 preview. I'd like to thank everybody who took the time to listen and watch the whole thing through. Again, I just ask that you like, comment, subscribe, and share. If you'd like to see more of these previews going forward, just leave a comment. You can say something. You can send it something on any of the social media pages in the description. Or again, if there's just something else that you would prefer for us to talk about, whether it's a different sport or just anything in general, just again, feel free to comment or just respond. Reach out to us on social media, and we will try our best to get that done. Again, this has been another episode of Brian's Deductions. Stay tuned for the next